Here are the answers for lesson 7-4, day 2. Solve the equation. There is a variable in the denominator, so you have to figure out the restricted values. 2a cannot be equal to 0, therefore a cannot be equal to 0. That takes care of the restriction from this denominator and also that last denominator. Now, because it's not a proportion, there's two ratios on the left side, I'm going to use the technique about multiplying all terms by the least common denominator, which is 6a. Multiply here by 6a, here by 6a, and here by 6a. 6 divided by 2 makes 3. A divided by a cancels out. 3 times 3 is 9. In the middle, 6 divided by 6 cancels out. We're left with a minus, an a, and a 5. That's negative 5a. On the right side, 6 divided by 3 makes 2. This a and this a cancel out. 2 times 2 is 4. Now solve the resulting equation. You could solve this mentally by figuring out that that needs to be a 1. 5 times 1 is 5, and 9 subtract 5 is 4. Or you can solve it by doing work steps. A equals 1. That was not a restricted value, so that's the solution. Number 10. There's a variable in the denominator, so there is a restriction. The denominator cannot be equal to 0. Therefore, m cannot be equal to 7. Now this is a proportion, so I'm going to choose the cross-multiplying technique. The product of the extremes is equal to the product of the means. Now distribute. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times m is 3m. 2 times 7 is 14, and 2 times m is 2m. Now I'm going to add the 3m to the right side and subtract the 14. This makes 1 is equal to 1m. That was not the restricted value, and so the answer is m equals 1. Number 12, there's going to be a restriction. The denominator cannot be equal to 0, therefore x cannot be equal to 2. Now this one here can be done by multiplying by the LCD, or by doing cross multiplication because it's a proportion, or recognizing that you can just multiply by x minus 2 to make the x minus 2 move over to the left side. So we'll get 2 times x minus 2, and that's equal to x minus 4. Now the distributive property, 2x minus 4 is equal to x minus 4. Subtract x from both sides, add 4 to both sides, and we get x equals 0. That's not a restricted value, and so the answer is x equals 0. Number 14, there's going to be a restriction. X cannot be equal to 2. This is a proportion, so I'm going to use cross multiplication. Diagonally, 3 times 2x minus 4 is equal to, and now the other diagonal is 1 times x minus 2, which is just x minus 2. Now distribute. 6x minus 12. Subtract x from both sides, creating 5x. Add 12 to both sides, creating 10. Therefore, x equals 2. But that was our restricted value. With no other possible answers, we say no solution. Number 16. This has a restriction. The denominator cannot be equal to 0. Therefore, W cannot be equal to -2. This has the style of a proportion, so I'm going to use cross multiplication. Multiplying one diagonal is 1 times 2W plus 4, which is just 2W plus 4. That's equal to what you get when you multiply the other diagonal. Now some distributive property on the right side. I'm going to subtract 2W from both sides, creating 4 is equal to 6W plus 4. Then subtract 4, creating 0 is equal to 6W, and therefore W is equal to 0. That's not a restricted value, and so the answer is W equals 0. Number 18, there's a variable in the bottom, so there is a restricted value. 4y take away 8 cannot be equal to 0. So 4y cannot be equal to 8, so y cannot be equal to 2. Based on the format of the equation, it's a proportion. Cross multiplication works. 4 times y minus 2 is equal to the other diagonal, which is 1 times 4y minus 8, or just 4y minus 8. Now distribute. 4y minus 8 is equal to 4y minus 8. The left side is equal to the right side. This is a special case. The answer is all real numbers, except remember the restriction that y cannot be 2. So the answer is all real numbers except 2. Number 20. First, our restriction. The letter A is in the denominator, and that cannot be 0. Now solve using cross multiplication. One diagonal is A times A plus 1. The other diagonal is 6 times 2, which makes 12. A times A is A squared, and A times 1 is A. This is a quadratic equation, so I want to create standard form. Subtract 12 from both sides. That creates the 0 over here, which is what you need for standard form of a quadratic equation. This is a trinomial, and it factors. A times A gets you started. Now we need two numbers that multiply to make -12, and the two numbers add up to +1. That would be a +4 and a -3. From factored form, we can get the answers. A plus 4 equals 0, or A minus 3 is equal to 0. Solve them both. A equals -4, and A is equal to +3. Neither of those were our restricted value, and so those two numbers are the answers for A. Number 22, we're going to have restrictions because there are variables in the denominators. The first denominator cannot be 0. Subtract 3 from both sides. Then divide by 4. The other denominator cannot be 0 either. Subtract 3 from both sides. Then divide by 4. How come we got the same thing? What do you notice now about the two denominators now that you take a more careful look at it? Those denominators are really exactly the same. Addition is commutative, so 3 plus 4x is the same thing as 4x plus 3. Because the denominators are the same, this gives us even another way of solving the problem. If two fractions have equal denominators and the fractions are equal, then that means that the numerators would have to be equal. The 5 would have to be equal to the 4. But that's a false statement with no variables in it. And so the answer is no solution. Page 306. The sum of a number and its reciprocal is 25/12. Find the number. We are asked to find an unknown number. Let's call it x. Now when we read the sentence and we come across the phrase a number, we're going to use an x in place of that. The word sum means to add. Now let's read further to know what we're going to add. One of the things in the sum is a number. That was x. The other thing that's mentioned is its reciprocal. The reciprocal of a number is when you flip it upside down or when you put a 1 on top of the number. Now it says is, that's an equals, and then it says 25/12. Notice that this creates an equation that has a variable in the bottom. So there's going to be a restriction. The denominator cannot be equal to 0. This is not a proportion because it has two ratios on the left side. So our method is going to be to multiply everything by the LCD. Now one denominator is x, the other is 12. Putting those together gives us 12x as our LCD. Multiply all terms by 12x. Here, here, and here. 12x times x is 12x squared. In the middle, x cancels out x, leaving 12 times 1, which is positive 12. On the right side, 12 cancels out 12, leaving x times 25, which is 25x. This is a quadratic equation because it has an exponent of 2. So the technique is to put it in standard form. Get a 0 on the right side. That can be done by subtracting the 25x. Now factor the trinomial with two sets of parentheses. Now, because this trinomial has a leading coefficient of 12 instead of just having x squared, this is going to be more complicated to factor because there's possibilities to consider. One way to make 12x squared is 12x times 1x. Another way is to go 6x times 2x, and another way is to go 4x times 3x. Now the number at the end is also a 12, and so there's different ways to make a 12. Look in the middle and notice it's negative. So we need to have a negative number times a negative number to make that positive 12. We could have negative 12 times negative 1, or negative 6 times negative 2, or negative 4 times negative 3. In the middle is negative 25x. We need to create negative 25x with a combination of our selection of here from here and our selection from here. What you do is you try some numbers and fill them in, and you test it out to see if you can make negative 25. If it doesn't work, you erase and try different numbers. Take a look at the third possibility here and the third possibility here. If the 4x got multiplied to the negative 4, that would make negative 16x. And if the 3x got multiplied to the negative 3, that would make negative 9x. When you add those together, that makes negative 25x, which is the middle term. I think it's those last two possibilities that we want to use. 4x times 3x. Now, where should we put the negative 4 and the negative 3 so that our outer and inner products from FOIL make the negative 25? I wanted to put the negative 4 so that it would get multiplied to the 4x. That means the negative 4 needs to go out at the end so that the outer product is the negative 16x. And the negative 3 has to go here in the middle so that that inner product is the negative 9x. There's our factored form. Now, take each factor and set it equal to 0. And solve. Add 3, and then divide by 4. For the other one, add 4, and then divide by 3. Now check, were either of those restricted? No, our restricted value was 0, so both of these are legitimate answers. Here are the two answers to the equation. This problem says to find the number. We actually discovered that two different numbers are possible. The unknown number could be 3/4, or the unknown number could be 4/3.